Crucis Church. You've just heard the bells ringing, and a few moments ago the drummer and the piper piping. And they are sounds that John Browness, who was brought up, baptised in the font, and is buried in this churchyard. They're the sounds that he would have heard all those years ago. And today we're going to be finding out about one of our villagers who lived here, died here, but actually had an extraordinary life. And I'm delighted that Stephen, one of his descendants, is here to tell us all about John, and the reenactors who are here as well to add life to the story. And at the end of the presentation, I'm delighted to say we'll be unveiling a new plaque. Generally speaking, in churches, there are grand memorials to important people. And one of the great things that we're going to be doing today is actually unveil a memorial to someone who was very ordinary, but actually had an extraordinary life. And I hope when we've removed the screen, if you would like to, do come forward at the end as we unveil the plaque and say a prayer of dedication and remembrance. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Right. I'm going to say what my name is, but John's kindly done that for me. But welcome to this commemoration of the life of one of the villagers of Ampney Crucis, who happens to be my great-great-great-grandfather. Before we begin, I must say a huge thank you to John Swanson for his work in gaining the approval of the church authorities for the installation of the plaque in John Browness's honour, for organising the production of the plaque, and for publicising this event, which I hope will be of interest to all of you who have joined us today. Thanks are also due to my cousin, Ian Browness from Otten, who with me has jointly funded this project. For many years, Ian and I have been carrying out extensive research into our family history, so when I use the word we, it is Ian to whom I'm referring. Finally, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Edwards and Matthew Yule, who are reenactors of the role of the British drummer during the Napoleonic Wars. They will be helping me to demonstrate what a drummer in the British Army back period did. Also to Rob Yule, who is taking the role of the recruiting sergeant. I'd just like to say a few words about reenactors. Having over a few years become familiar with their activities, I've been very impressed by their utter devotion to authenticity and attention to detail, and I'm sure that this will be reflected in what we will see and hear today. The presentation will cover John's origins and early life, Ampney Crucis in John's lifetime, his recruitment into the army.
We're going to plug you in.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me at the back now? Okay, this presentation will cover John's origins and early life, Ampney Crucis in John's lifetime, his recruitment into the army, his army career, his discharge and return to Ampney Crucis, and finally John's family and descendants. I hope that there will then be enough time for any questions you may have. Interspersed throughout this narrative at appropriate points, we will be looking at the many and various roles undertaken by a drummer in the British Army. So we will cover recruitment, regulating the soldiers' daily lives in the barracks, the training of new recruits, discipline, transmitting officers' commands, and medical duties including first aid and stretcher bearing. Okay. First time. Right. I don't know if you can see that. We're graced with a beautiful day outside. It doesn't do anything for the selection. But, okay. On the 14th of March, John was baptised in that very font at the back there. The parish record on the screen behind me shows John, son of Mary Browness or Browness, base born. This short entry tells us a number of things. Firstly, base-born means that John's birth was illegitimate, so we are unlikely ever to know who his father was. The fact that the curate made 2 attempts to spell Mary's surname tells us that she was illiterate and that a family name was unknown to the curate. This implies that she was not from Ampney Crucis, so where was she from? I've spent many years trying to solve this, and to cut a very long story short, she was almost certainly Mary Browness of Oddington, who was baptised on April 28, 1754. Why did she come to Ampney Crucis, which is a 7 to 8 hour walk away? We can never know, but a possible scenario is that being pregnant, her parents rejected her, and she had to find a friendly parish to support her. Now this would be by no means easy, as all parishes were reluctant to take on financial responsibility for newcomers. I suspect she tried a number of parishes on a long trek south, and perhaps someone in Ampney Crucis was prepared to accommodate her for the 40 days necessary to qualify for parish support. I've checked with Gloucestershire archives, and unfortunately there are no surviving settlement certificates for Ampney Crucis, which would have given details of Mary's origin, or bastardy ones, which would have identified John's father. So we know nothing about his father, and just a little about his mother. But we do know a lot about John. In fact, we even know what he looks like, and I'll come back to that later. What was Ampney Crucis like in John's early lifetime? Next slide, please. We can get some idea of this from the Ampney Crucis Register of Baptisms, Marriages and Burials in 1811, where a census was recorded by the curate William Gray and the overseer John Creed. The slide is difficult to decipher even if it was more visible. But the main statistics of interest are those which cover what occupations the village population of 470 were engaged in. Number of families 124, of which they were employed in husbandry or labour 88, in trade or handicraft 25, other families not included 11. So from this it is clear that the vast majority of families were employed in husbandry or labour, i.e. farming. In 1791, when John was 7 years old, his mother married John Tipper. She was still recorded as Mary Browness or Browness, but was now shown as of this parish. There are no further Ampney Crucis parish records for Mary or her husband, indicating at some point they moved away from this parish. We do not know whether they took John with them. In his youth, John received no schooling and was therefore illiterate throughout his life. Next slide, please. I hope we can make that out. It's a picture of a plough boy. Once strong enough, he took up agricultural labouring, but on a visit to Cirencester on the 10th of August 1799, his attention was drawn by the sounds of a drum and a fife. Looking towards them, he saw the bright colours of an army recruiting party and went to ask them.
Beating order by His Majesty's command. These orders authorise you to beat of drum, raise so many volunteers as shall be wanting in any town or county or part of Great Britain, to recruit and fill up the respective companies of the 1st Battalion, the 36th or Herefordshire Regiment of Foot, wherein all magistrates, justice of the peace, constables and other officers are hereby required to be assisting us in providing quarters or otherwise as there shall be occasion to warrant. Given on this 10th day of October 1799, under the orders of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Byrne, Commanding Officer, 1st Battalion, 36th Herefordshire Regiment. Lancashire. Come forth, listen to the recruiting call of my regiment, the Saucy Greens, the 36th Regiment of Foot, one of the finest regiments in His Majesty's Army. Come and be accoutred like me in the finest of red coats or in the green coat of our bandsmen. Come forth and earn a shilling a day. I give you a bounty of 8 golden guineas. Think of that, you Plough boys. 8 golden guineas, more than you can earn in a year. And we'll give you it for enlisting in His Majesty's Army. Any apprentices who have foul masters who beat you, come and join the army. We do not beat, except by beat of drum. Any wives who have stern husbands, send him to me, and I shall bring him into the service of the king. Any husbands who have foul wives with lashing tongues, come and join us, for there shall be no lash in this regiment unless you cause order to upset my colonel, and then you shall feel the lash. But other than that, how about adventure, fine wine, foreign women? Come abroad, get out of this parish, go see the world. I have been to Spain, to the West Indies, to France and the Low Countries. How far can you say you have been? Down to the next parish? Come with us, enlist today, take the shilling, take the bounty, and join the 36th Regiment of Foot for adventure. God save the King!
Huzzah! 3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Huzzah! 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 Huzzah!
What the Sergeant didn't make clear was that the good proportion of the bounty that's described would be spent on what is known as necessaries, which is the new soldier's uniform, kit and equipment. and also what the soldier would later find out is that quite a lot of his money would be spent that evening in the local pub with his newfound friends. All on him, of course, because he's now got a lot of money. Okay. But anyway, the sergeant's patter was more than enough to tempt John away from his uncertain life as a ploughboy, and thus he was persuaded to take the king's shilling, and so it was that he joined the 36th Herefordshire Regiment of Foot as a private. He was 15 years of age, though the regimental records would always show him as 3 years older than that. John had committed to unlimited service and would remain with the 36th for not far short of 18 years. This means that he served throughout the whole of the period of the Napoleonic Wars, which began in 1803 and ended with the Battle of Waterloo on the 18th of June 1815. Men awoke at dawn to the sound of the valley, and this is what it sounded like. Summoned soldiers to eat at 1 or 2 o'clock, which you'll probably recognise as when we put the kettle on. Sunset, the retreat was placed to the temple and for the evening parade, and to mark the close of the working day. Between 8 and 10 o'clock, depending upon the season, the drummers beat the tattoo, prompting orderly sergeants to ensure that every man was in bed and that all fires and lights were completely extinguished. Start, please.
Drummers and fifers basically are the same animal. It's just that some drummers were required to play the drum and some were required to play the fife. We often got youngsters playing the fife because they're a little bit small to carry a full-size drum, but it's basically the same animal. In some regiments, a drummer had to be able to play both instruments. If you couldn't play both, you'd be returned to the ordinary ranks. So I'm also a drummer for my sins. Taking that time. So we got battlefield commands on the drum. Now you heard the drum accompanied by fife. That just makes it a bit easier to recognise the tunes. If you hear drumming all the time, it's pretty monotonous, so it's not always easy to pick out what the drum means. If you've got a nice little tune that goes with it, people recognise the tunes, even put perhaps words, maybe rude words to the tunes, so it helps them remember. But some drum signals were used just on their own without use of fife. One of these is the preparative. The preparative basically warns the officers in particular to take control of the men to fire volleys and fire the muskets. It also advises the soldiers what's coming next. So a drummer would beat the preparative on the order of the colonel, and the other drummers would take up the same beat. Remember that. And that's repeated until everyone knows that they're about to fire a volley. At the end of it, you've got to have a ceasefire signal. Now you imagine all the volleys are going off, there's a tremendous amount of noise. Voices may not always be heard, but if you keep repeating a drum signal, eventually the men will realise that they don't keep firing, they cease firing. That's the beginning of a beating called the General. And it's the first part which is used as a ceasefire.
But I, for one, wouldn't be here talking to you today. John met his future wife while serving in Ireland and married Margaret Maguire, who was a widow, on the 29th of July 1811 in Horsham, Sussex. But John and Margaret made their mark, both illiterate. They had 3 children: Susan, baptised on the 25th of May 1812 in Seaford, Sussex; George, baptised on the 15th of June 1814 in Maidstone, Kent; and James, baptised again there on the 9th of February 1817 here in Ampney Crucis. In anticipation of his discharge from the army, John had been granted a furlough from the 25th of January and on the 23rd of February 1817 to take his family back to his home parish. How did the family fare once they were back in Ampney Crucis? John's only pension was 5 shillings and 3 pence per week. This was scarcely enough to feed a family of 5, when an agricultural labourer would be earning 10 shillings a week. So all of the family, when fit and strong enough, would have to seek work in order to survive. And of course, John's ability to work would be limited by his disability. The family had only been back in Ampney Crucis for 6 months when Susan died, aged only 5. John himself only lived for a further 7 years and was buried on the 18th of June 1824. Perhaps the most shocking of the family's losses was that of John and Margaret's son, James. In April 1829, at the age of 13, he was accidentally crushed to death by an overturned cart. Mary would live on for a further 19 years. Would live for a further 19 years, dying in 1845 of typhus fever and with the status of a pauper. It is not known where in Ampney Crucis the Browness family lived. However, there are 2 national census records where George is mentioned. In June 1841, he and his mother are shown as being just down the road in the Crown Inn. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the first recorded mention of a Browness in a pub. A Browness in a pub. Who would ever have thought it? Then in March 1851, George was found at Ford Villa, a farm on which he was working. George was the only child to reach adulthood. He spent much of his life labouring in London. Here he met and married Mary Foster, and they had 4 children. When his wife died in 1871, George returned to Ampney Crucis, spent his last days in Cirencester Workhouse, where on 28th of March 1872 he died of asthma and chronic disease of the heart. Incidentally, how many of you actually come from Ampney Crucis? Can you put your hands up if you come from Ampney Crucis or live in Ampney Crucis? Have you seen where the workhouse was? It's now the Cotswolds District Council's offices. That was the workhouse. I went and had a look at it again this morning. Anyway, George's body was returned to Ampney Crucis, where he was buried in an unmarked grave in this churchyard, as were those of John, Margaret, Susan and James. I'll soon be asking you whether you have any questions. Before I do, here's a question for you, the people of Ampney Crucis. Consider these facts. The first cremation in England was at Woking Crematorium in March 1885, 13 years after George's burial. And the Ampney Crucis Lynchgate burial ground was not opened until 1888. In the 88 years of the Browness family's presence here, from John's birth in 1784 to George's death in 1872, there were 818 burials in this churchyard. The parish records go back to 1579, so there are another 200 years of burials, which must take the total numbers buried here in these into the 2,000 or 3,000. So my question is, considering the size of the churchyard, where did they put all these bodies? Any ideas? I'm now going to ask John Swanson to say a prayer for John and his family, after which I will unveil the plaque in John's honour.
May I invite as many of you who would like to come forward up here in the chancel?
I'd like my family to be as close as possible. No, no, no.
So Pete was born. You were born.
Oh, and then I came at age 5, but I was a choir boy in this church, so I'm in familiar territory, but I'm not seeing.
Do come a bit further in.
Yeah.
So we remember before God John Browness, Margaret, his wife, Susan, James and George, his children. Dear Lord and Father, we thank you for the Browness family, those whom we remember this day, those who have trod in this building, and those with us this day. We thank you for the life of John, all the extraordinary opportunities he had, a young lad from this village, serving his country. We thank you that we're able to honour him this day, and those of this village we remember. Amen. Amen. So Stephen is now going to unveil our new memorial plaque.
This is the first time I've seen this.
So it carries the insignia of the 36th Herefordshire Regiment.
And so it's a tribute to John Browness of Ampney Crucis, 1784 to 1824. Drummer, 36th Herefordshire Regiment, foot in the Napoleonic Wars.
Thank you.
Yes. And to conclude, I'd just like to say that most people, when they take up researching family history, hope to discover that they are descended from someone famous or noteworthy, those that we call the great and the good. I confess that I have harboured such dreams, and in this regard I've been unsuccessful. However, I have uncovered this man, and through research I've been able to weave his life story with all its ups and downs. As John said earlier, despite his humble origins, illegitimate and illiterate, this ordinary man led an extraordinary life. And now he has a plaque. Before I ask the questions, a couple of things. If you've enjoyed this event, there is a plate by the door to give donations to the church. And also, I'd like you please to show your appreciation for Paul, Rob and Matthew.
The Lincolnshire poacher. Now, Stephen found out through his research that one of the regiments, the Herefordshire Regiment, which later became 2nd Battalion, the Worcester Regiment, at some stage in their history played the Lincolnshire poacher, which is unusual because obviously there are regiments by name based in Herefordshire, and yet they're using a Lincolnshire tune. The Lincolnshire poacher was a very popular air, and a number of regiments did actually use it, so I'm not surprised that 36 at some point used the Lincolnshire poacher. So we'll just end with that one.